Hello everyone, you're watching the channel Stories of Our Life. Friends, make yourselves comfortable. I wish you to truly enjoy listening to this life story.
Michael had always been an honest and decent guy, but once he made a deal with his conscience. As they say, never make vows in this life. Michael was 15 when he became an orphan one day. His parents got into an accident when the bus they were on collided with a train at a railway crossing. Several people were injured, but Shirley and Ernest, Michael's parents, died on the spot. The driver came out without a scratch. He was, of course, later tried and sentenced, but it couldn't bring back the deceased. The question of what to do with Michael arose. In the same village lived his aunt, his mother's cousin, Ella. She was a scandalous, quarrelsome, and very greedy woman. Her only husband ran away from her 3 years after their wedding. They had no children. She lived only for herself and was content with her life. When the authorities suggested that she take care of Michael, she initially refused. Why would she want him? So what if he was a relative? She was used to living alone, for her own pleasure. But then, when a social worker explained that she would receive a salary for taking care of the child, and it would count towards her work experience, Ella started to think about how much she earned at her current job. Only $120. And she had to go through the village 3 times a week to deliver various payments, newspapers, regardless of the weather. On the other hand, here was a decent salary. She could stay at home for several years. Ella agreed. And Michael didn't really have a say in it. He was like someone in a daze after the death of his parents. Ella allocated a small room for him in her house, and Shirley and Ernest's house was left abandoned on the edge of the village. So it stood, unwanted by anyone. Only Michael would sometimes go there to grieve secretly or even cry. It was the only place where the 15-year-old boy could let his emotions out. Of course, men don't cry. But when no one saw, he could do it a little. Michael often remembered how happily he lived with his parents, the tender hands of his mother. She always smelled so sweet, like vanilla or baked goods. After all, Shirley worked at the local bakery. Ernest was remembered by his son as a hard worker. He was always tinkering, building something in the backyard, in his free time when he wasn't working in the fields. Michael always tried to help his father and be like him in everything. And now his parents were gone, leaving only Ella, who treated Michael as if he were just an empty space. She cooked food, washed his clothes, but talking heart to heart was never on the agenda. And Michael didn't really need it. Ella could never replace his parents. And she didn't even try. Time flew by, and now the boy had finished school. He didn't even hesitate about where to apply. The Institute of Road Construction was his goal. On one hand, Ella was glad that he would finally move out, but on the other hand, she was sad because she would no longer receive her salary as his guardian. Michael was already 18, and he was entitled to some payments during his education. That's when Ella hinted to her nephew that it would be better if he gave her power of attorney. She was an adult, better equipped to handle money. She would give him as much as he needed. But Michael wasn't a fool, he understood what Ella was getting at. It meant he would have to beg her for every cent he needed. The boy refused, which infuriated his aunt. First, try to get into university. Ella said, "You're just daydreaming. You'll be studying at the institute, living in the city. Ha! You'll end up shoveling manure in a stable for a farmer, and that will be your future. Don't expect any help from me anymore. You're all grown up now." Michael just shrugged and submitted his documents to the university. He got accepted into the higher education institution and left his hometown. Ella didn't even accompany him to the bus stop, and Michael didn't really mind. Over these 3 years, they never really became close family. Nevertheless, he was grateful to her for taking care of him until he reached adulthood, for not letting him go hungry, and for doing what she could and thought was necessary. When Michael was studying and living in the dormitory, Ella even visited him a few times. Ostensibly to check up on him. But Michael understood that Ella just wanted to visit the capital and had nowhere else to stay. so she came to him, and he would arrange with the dormitory guards to let her stay for the night. With the passing years, he realized that she was, after all, his only relative in the world. That's why he didn't cut off the communication and even gave her some money for the return trip from his scholarship. Ella accepted the help without a hint of conscience, even though she didn't bring anything for him from the village, not even a bag of potatoes. Years passed. After graduating from the institute, Michael got a job at a reputable transportation company, rented an apartment, and started a new life. And Ella, realizing that her nephew could become a good support and pillar for her, became affectionate, attentive, and called him almost every day to inquire about everything. "Good job, Michael," she would praise her nephew, "you've achieved what you wanted." "Of course, not without my help. In general, your parents can rest peacefully in heaven. I raised their son to be a worthy person." Michael didn't argue with Ella. Let her believe that his achievements were her doing. After all, he remembered how she used to reproach him and send him to work in the stable. He remembered, but he didn't hold a grudge. It wasn't in Michael's nature to blame the past. Besides, with the passing years, Ella started to show signs of weakness. She wasn't as agile and energetic as before. Her health was deteriorating. Ella aged rather quickly, probably due to her difficult character. But whatever the case, Michael would send her small sums of money monthly for her medications. Ella accepted the help, but in her mind, she thought he could have sent more. Michael's boss was David, a man already in his later years, strong and authoritative. His subordinates were a little afraid of him because he could withhold bonuses for a simple mistake or even fire someone. But he paid well, so people clung to their positions. Michael ended up in this company by chance. He saw an advertisement on the website that the road construction company was looking for a design engineer and went for an interview. David liked Michael and hired him. The work was challenging but interesting. Michael spent less time in the office and more time on the construction sites. David kept a close eye on the young engineer and realized that he made the right decision in hiring him, even though he was someone from the streets without any connections. He had found a good specialist. Generally, David got used to double-checking everything in life. Circumstances had made him trust only himself. Especially after the biggest tragedy in his life occurred. David had a family, a wife, a daughter. He adored them. Everything he did in his life was for them. One morning, his wife Ashley, together with their 5-year-old daughter, decided to go to their countryside house. David tried to persuade his wife to wait for him after work and then go together, but Ashley insisted on doing things her way. And that decision turned out to be fatal. She lost control of the car on the road and crashed into a tree. Ashley died on the spot, but their 5-year-old daughter, Deborah, became permanently disabled. No medical facility in the world could help. The girl would never be able to walk, that was the doctor's verdict. David, who blamed himself for what happened, was overwhelmed. Yes, he was to blame. After all, he had allowed Ashley to drive, knowing that she wasn't confident behind the wheel. He gave in to his wife's wishes just once. And here was the result: Ashley was in the grave, and Deborah was disabled. He poured all his love, tenderness, and attention onto his daughter. David did everything to help Deborah adapt to her new condition. She had the best doctors and teachers. Her father showered her with gifts. When Deborah grew older, she attended the best school in the city, riding in her wheelchair. David made sure no one would mistreat her there. Everyone praised her. For this, he donated huge sums to the school. Deborah had friends, and it didn't matter if they befriended her solely because of her status as the boss's daughter. On the surface, everything seemed perfectly natural. Deborah even enrolled in a dance school, where she had a private coach. There was also a music school and an art school. Anything the girl wished for. However, her interests quickly faded, but her father was always ready to indulge her new whims. In short, Deborah grew up as a spoiled, mischievous girl. Sometimes David admitted to himself that he should have been stricter with his daughter, but he felt sorry for her. And so, he couldn't refuse her anything. If she didn't like the governess, they would fire her and hire a new one. If the driver was 2 minutes late, he could say goodbye to his job. If the girl wanted a party just because she was in a bad mood, she would have a party with the best entertainers in the city and a bunch of friends. After finishing school, Deborah got into one of the prestigious universities. She was too lazy to study. But would her daddy's money help? Of course, it would. And in the meantime, she could enjoy herself at nightclubs. Her limited physical abilities were not a problem, as she always had a guard and a driver by her side. Deborah even started a romance with one of the most handsome guys. David didn't object, although he didn't really like Brian. He came from a simple family with no money, just a pretty face. But, on the other hand, he understood that finding a suitor, let alone a husband, for Deborah would be difficult. Maybe everything would work out with Brian. After graduating from the university, everything was indeed heading towards a wedding. They even set a date for the registration. But one day, David overheard a conversation between his future son-in-law and someone else in the living room, thinking that the owner of the house and his daughter were already asleep. "My dear, don't be jealous," Brian said, "we came up with everything together back then." Yes, I had to pretend to be madly in love with that disabled girl. But how else? Only by marrying her, I can become a full-fledged member of their family. And then we'll play the second part of the play. We'll arrange an accident for her father, and Deborah, being a hysterical girl, won't be able to live without her dear daddy. She'll drink sedatives and overdose. Unfortunately, I won't be able to help her in any way, and he chuckled nastily, then started saying sweet things. David stood frozen in horror. This was the person Deborah had brought into their home. This scoundrel was plotting how to get rid of him and his daughter. He quietly walked away so Brian wouldn't notice him and then called an acquaintance. The acquaintance promised to help solve the problem. "Just make sure that no one suspects anything. I don't want any unnecessary trouble," he instructed. "I'll take care of it," the acquaintance agreed, but still asked, "Why don't you just kick him out of the house? I can't let him breathe after what he planned. And how do I explain to my daughter that I kicked out her fiancé? She's madly in love with him. She won't believe me. But this way, she'll cry, and that will be it." A day later, Brian was found in the river. He had driven his car off the bridge. The police determined that Brian had been drinking and simply lost control of the vehicle. For Deborah, the death of her beloved was a shock. She cried, and David tried to comfort her, assuring her that her life was just beginning, and she would find her true love someday. As for Brian, well, fate had its ways. David hired the best psychologists to help ease his daughter's pain, but their assistance didn't provide much relief. To numb her pain, Deborah started drinking alcohol more and more often, which horrified David. Maybe he should have just kicked Brian out? But even then, he wouldn't have disappeared from Deborah's life. Something needed to be done. A very knowledgeable doctor managed to stabilize his daughter's condition. She felt less inclined to drink, but the doctor admitted that it was temporary, and her emotional state needed improvement, filling her life with new colors and emotions. David immediately thought of sending her on an amazing cruise, but the doctor didn't approve of the idea. "She needs to fall in love again," the doctor suggested. "Fall in love?" David said, perplexed, raising his hands. "Am I supposed to buy her a fiancé like a toy? Besides, she doesn't even look at anyone after Brian's death." And there, he noticed a new colleague, Michael. Young, handsome, diligent, and intelligent. A simple guy, clearly not capable of deceit. One day, David invited Michael to his office and started a conversation not about work. He asked about his childhood, family. Learning that Michael was an orphan, he sympathized with the young man, as his own daughter had also lost her mother at a young age. And in passing, he mentioned Deborah's story, but without going into details. He briefly mentioned her unfortunate love, but kept silent about her alcohol problem. "It's sad," sighed Michael, "your daughter has been through a lot." "Yes, my girl has had a tough time," David replied. "Even now, it's not easy. But she's a good person. Do you want me to introduce you to her?" "I don't know," Michael hesitated. "Is that appropriate?" The boss's offer caught him off guard. Michael immediately sensed an underlying meaning and didn't know how to react. "Don't be so tense," the boss laughed. "I just want my daughter to become a bit happier, to get back to living. You shouldn't think that I'm matchmaking you too. No. I just want her to have some company. Just be friends with her." "But why me?" "Because you're an honest guy. She's a normal, beautiful girl, just in a wheelchair. But that's not a problem. And I'm not insisting on any romantic involvement between you. Quite the opposite, I don't want her to suffer. Just friendship. But remember, if you hurt her, you'll regret it." How could he refuse his boss? Michael nervously nodded in response. David was satisfied with the outcome of the conversation and invited Michael to his house for dinner on the weekend. David's mansion left an indelible impression on Michael. The two-story mansion, behind a tall stone fence, was surrounded by greenery. In the yard, there were exquisite flower beds filled with flowers. Among them, Michael recognized only roses, and there were just so many of them. There was also a swimming pool and a gazebo. Strolling in the yard with a guard was a huge dog. Michael was greeted by a petite and slender girl whom he later learned was the housekeeper, Jennifer. She warmly smiled at him and said that the hosts were waiting for him in the living room. Michael immediately noticed Deborah. Her thick, chestnut hair cascaded in large curls over delicate shoulders. She looked slim and graceful in her light trouser suit, giving him a curious glance as the guest. David introduced them, and as Michael kissed her hand, he noticed how petite and ethereal she seemed. Only at the last moment did he realize that she was seated not on a regular chair but in a special wheelchair. This realization momentarily disconcerted Michael, but he didn't let it show. Later, they all had dinner together, and afterwards, David and Michael discussed work matters. Deborah listened attentively but seemed to grow a bit bored towards the end. "My princess is tired of listening to us," David smiled. "Perhaps you two can take a stroll in the garden while I take a break in my office." "I don't mind," Deborah smiled and looked at the guest with her big blue eyes. "Michael, let me show you our garden." Michael nodded in response. Surprisingly, he felt that he genuinely liked the girl. If he initially came here plagued by doubts, now it felt like everything was just right. Deborah was a wonderful girl, not entirely conventional, but smart, beautiful, and charming. Deborah confidently maneuvered her wheelchair herself while Michael walked alongside her. She led him along the flower beds, briefly pointing out a few shrubs, and then stopped by an old apple tree that clearly didn't fit into the entire ensemble. Over the years, it had twisted and its bark had cracked in places, with its branches hanging down in a forlorn manner. "My mom and I planted this apple tree," Deborah said quietly. "Our landscape designer has wanted to cut it down for a long time, but I ordered them not to touch it." "Right, it's a memory of your mom," Michael nodded understandingly. "About my mom," Deborah echoed, paused, and then added with bitterness, "I hate her." "Who?" Michael was taken aback by her tone. "My mom, it's because of her that I am like this. If she hadn't taken the wheel back then and waited for Dad, I wouldn't have become disabled. And she would still be alive. And everything fell apart, broke. This apple tree is just my last memory. When I used to run on my own legs, I remember how I'd stomp the soil around it, watering the little tree afterwards. You see, it's like a link to my happy childhood." "Yes, it's not easy for you," Michael sighed, "but let go of the past, you can't change it. You have to think about the future." "And what's the point?" Deborah cried out in despair. "What can change for me? Nobody will ever love me." "Well, there was one person. The kindest, sweetest. He loved me, although he didn't please my dad. And then he died. Nobody wants me. Do you think I don't know that since childhood? My dad practically bought me friends. My classmates hung out with me only because I threw the most extravagant home parties. My dad was the school's sponsor. But then all those friends disappeared because they don't want to be friends with a disabled person. It's burdensome. And you didn't come here just for the sake of it. What did my dad promise you, a bonus or a threat of dismissal? You know he chose you for me like a stallion, right? Do you know why? Because a psychologist said that I need to fall in love. I need positive emotions. That's after my Brian's death. Dad thought I couldn't hear their conversation, but my hearing is very sharp. After saying all this, Deborah suddenly burst into tears. Michael, feeling helpless, tried to comfort and persuade her not to see the world only in black and white. He then sat down on the grass next to her and began to share his own story. He talked about the death of his parents and his wicked aunt, who counted how many slices of bread he ate each evening. Do you think I've been lucky in this life? Yes, I'm not disabled, thank God. But after my parents died, I never heard a kind word from anyone. It's been very tough. And your father is alive. And what a father he is. You can afford anything, Michael said. Anything? Deborah replied with a tearful smile. Even love? And you will find love, I'm sure of it. But I'm not sure about anything anymore. And they sat there under the old apple tree for a long time. Michael shared stories of his childhood in the countryside, and Deborah told him about her life, although she chose to remain silent about her erratic behavior for some reason. It was a July evening. The sun had long since disappeared behind the stone fence, but Michael and Deborah kept on talking. They somehow found a connection despite their differences. She was a spoiled girl, and he was a rural boy used to achieving everything on his own in life. They could have continued sitting there, but it was getting cold. David got worried and went to look for them. Oh, excuse me, I lost track of time, Michael said, realizing the hour. I should be going now. Thank you for a pleasant evening. Are you driving? David asked, concerned. I'll tell the driver to take you. I have my own car, Michael gratefully nodded. He smiled. Goodbye, to Deborah. She invited him to visit again next weekend. Yes, the connection was definitely made. Later, David sat in his office and thought, Michael seems like a good guy. Maybe he'll become a match for my Deborah. She's really come alive. The main thing is that he's a good person, and I have enough money for both of them. As Deborah drifted off to sleep, she thought, Dad is quite the schemer. It's obvious why he invited Michael. But, well, he seems like a decent guy. Michael, on his way home, kept thinking about his conversation with Deborah. Clearly, this girl was accustomed to living luxuriously and never denying herself anything. At the same time, she was so simple and pitiable, she would never be able to walk. But she was so beautiful. In short, the first meeting went well. Michael visited his boss again the following weekend, he couldn't resist the invitation. And then again, and again. They started meeting in the city, going to cafes, strolling along the waterfront. Deborah was always the initiator. Passers-by looked at them with surprise, he was tall and strong, and she, sitting in a wheelchair, looked like a fragile little child. Michael and Deborah chatted, laughed, and didn't notice anyone else around. Thanks to the psychologist's advice, Deborah fell in love. For Michael, it was a bit more complicated. Yes, he liked Deborah, but he was more like going along with it. He could see that their meetings brought her joy. But, to be honest, his heart remained silent. She was just a friend to him. Michael realized that this couldn't go on forever, he needed to talk to Deborah. He also had to tell David, who had asked about Michael's intentions. The truth was, there were no intentions, they were just friends, nothing more. But one day, everything changed. That day, Michael was at a construction site. Then he stopped by the office to check his email. As he was leaving, his phone rang. It was David. Michael, where are you? The boss asked hoarsely. Still at the site? No, Michael replied cheerfully, I'm heading home. Michael, can you come over? Deborah is in trouble. She won't talk to anyone. She locked herself in the bathroom. I thought she had become friends with you. Maybe you can convince her to open the door. I don't want to break it down, and she's strong. David, what happened? Michael inquired. It was a phone call. Come over, the boss replied shortly. In the time they had become very close friends. Of course, Michael immediately rushed to David's place. He was met by a gloomy security guard at the gates. Michael nodded back, not understanding what was happening, and hurried to the porch of the house. There, pale as a wall, stood Jennifer. She didn't say anything to Michael, just gestured for him to follow her into Deborah's room. It was on the ground floor, a huge room, lavishly furnished, with its own bathroom and a terrace. David stood by the closed bathroom door and kept knocking persistently. Deborah, my dear, open up. Deborah. There was no response, only occasional sobs from the girl. Michael gave a questioning look to David, who let out a tired sigh and stepped away from the door. They went out to the corridor. We had a doctor today, he whispered, just a routine monthly checkup, nothing serious. And what did he say? Michael raised an eyebrow. Deborah asked him if she could get pregnant and carry a child in the future. That idiot immediately said that if it happened, she would never give birth. There would be a miscarriage, early or late, so if Deborah ever gets married, she'll have to find a surrogate mother. Those words really upset her. So, you think no one needs me? That I'm worthless, empty? Deborah cried out. The doctor couldn't calm her down. He was about to give her a sedative, but she hid in the bathroom. Where is the doctor now? I sent him away. How could he speak so directly? He knows how sensitive Deborah is, David replied. How can I help? I don't understand, Michael said. Michael, all hope is on you. My daughter has convinced herself that she's not needed, that her life is over. And you are her only friend. I am willing to accept you as my son-in-law. I bought this ring. Propose to her. I'm sure she'll say yes. She really likes you, David rambled on, holding out a box with a ring. Michael looked at David in astonishment. He always believed that marriage should be based on love. Yes, he had been spending time with Deborah, but he considered it just a friendly gesture, as requested by her father. But now, a seed of doubt had been planted in his mind. What was so wrong about marrying Deborah? Sure, she couldn't walk, but she was overall a very charming, intelligent, and sweet girl, and marrying her would open up great opportunities for Michael. All right, he said slowly. But can I ask one question? Why did you choose me? Surely among your business partners, there must be a wealthy heir? It's common to arrange such marriages for business reasons. I don't need to join forces with anyone, David smirked. I can handle everything myself, and you are a worthy man with a good head on your shoulders. You'll be a great assistant in the business. David wasn't telling the whole truth. There was a more significant reason behind his choice. He was used to always being in control, keeping everything under his authority, and a poor son-in-law would always be grateful for anything he received and wouldn't betray him. That was certain. Of course, he allowed the thought that Michael might genuinely love his daughter, but the material aspect was more critical to him. Michael felt conflicted, unsure of what to do. He couldn't deny that there was some affection between him and Deborah, but he wasn't sure if it was love. Nevertheless, he found himself considering the idea, partly because of the opportunities David offered. The story of Michael and Deborah continued to unfold, entwined with complicated emotions and uncertainties about the path they were about to take. Give me the ring, Michael thought, and firmly extended his hand. But I want to talk to Deborah privately. David nodded in agreement. Michael approached the bathroom door and listened, no sound. Deborah, he called out. Please, open the door. It's me, Michael. He heard a faint movement, and then Deborah's loud cry, why did you come here? Will you speak comforting words to me now? I'm good, I'm sweet, nonsense. I'm crippled, and I'll be like this forever. I should have died with my mother. The sound of running water followed, then a scream. There was no time to hesitate. Michael carefully examined the door, it was heavy and robust, but he wasn't weak either. He kicked the lock with his foot, then again. On the third attempt, the door gave in. David rushed into the room and watched, unsure whether to stop Michael. The situation was dire. Deborah sat in her wheelchair at the edge of the bathtub. Her hand was lowered, and water from the tap mixed with a thin stream of blood from her wrist. She looked at Michael in bewilderment. "I couldn't do it. It hurt," she whispered softly. Michael immediately rushed to her, inspected the wound. Indeed, it was just a superficial cut. "Silly girl," he whispered, gently taking her injured hand and wrapping it in a towel. "Why would you do this?" "Why?" Deborah sobbed, tears streaming down her face. "Because my life is empty. It was and will always be like this. I'm not needed by anyone." "Don't say that," Michael said softly. "You're needed by your father, and you're needed by me." "Me?" "You're lying," she cried, tears pouring from her eyes. "Why do you need me? You're only with me because my father is your boss." "You're wrong," Michael said just as quietly. "I really like you, Deborah. It seems like I love you." "You're lying," she repeated. Michael shook his head, then embraced her and held her close. Yes, he was lying. But it was a lie to save her. It was the first time Michael had made a deal with his conscience, vowing his love to the unloved. "Deborah, will you marry me?" he whispered in her ear. "What did you say?" She looked up at him with tearful eyes. "Repeat." "Marry me," he said again. "You won't deceive me, right?" "Never." And they kissed for the first time. David stood behind the door and heard everything. Well, soon there would be a wedding in his family. Everything would be as he had decided. They didn't call an ambulance. Deborah's cuts were minor. The housekeeper, Jennifer, simply bandaged her hand. While Deborah and Jennifer were in the room, David and Michael went out into the corridor. "Why haven't you given my ring yet?" the owner whispered quietly. "Do you think I didn't notice? Decided to be sneaky?" "Never even crossed my mind," Michael smiled. "I just thought I could buy the ring for my bride myself. Here, take it." And he handed the box with the jewelry to David, who nodded approvingly in response. Michael would make a good son-in-law. Independent. They held the wedding a month later at the most expensive restaurant in town. Among the guests were influential people, business partners. Deborah shone in her gorgeous dress, and even the wheelchair did not diminish her overall appearance. Michael, in his expensive suit, looked important and handsome. A handsome groom. The young couple was happy. Yes, they were truly happy on that day. Then family life began. As promised, David immediately made Michael his deputy, offering him a decent salary. David also suggested that they buy a house, but Deborah disagreed. She was attached to her childhood home and the garden. Michael agreed with her. They would all live together with David. Surprisingly, Michael started realizing that he loved his wife, and with each passing day, his feelings only grew stronger. They spent a lot of time together. Deborah forgot about her tantrums and her past life. She became a devoted and caring wife, even trying to cook for her beloved husband in the kitchen, with the help of the chef. They often went on outings to the city's shopping centers with Jennifer, enjoying spoiling Michael with interesting souvenirs. In general, they had a real idyllic life. David, watching their happiness, rejoiced. And he was right about everything. Although he didn't account for everything. 2 years passed. Deborah couldn't let go of the idea of becoming a mother, and with admirable persistence, she started going to the reproductive health clinic. She wanted to conceive naturally, but the doctors unanimously insisted that if pregnancy was possible at all, it could only be achieved through a surrogate mother. What's wrong with that? The family planning center doctor tried to convince her. It will still be your child. Someone else will carry and give birth to the baby. But I want to do it myself, the young woman replied shyly. Understand that after the trauma you've been through, you will likely lose the embryo at 10 or 12 weeks. No, you can choose not to listen to me, but you'll see that I'm right. Believe me, losing a child is never easy, even at such an early stage. And think about the stress it would put on your body. With a surrogate mother, she carries and gives birth. Maybe your husband is against it? No, Michael agrees with the doctors. There you have it. You should listen to your husband. With time, Michael and the doctors convinced her. They started looking for a surrogate mother, but none of them satisfied Deborah. Some were too old, some too young, some too loose, some too foolish. Deborah, she'll just be like an incubator for your little one, David tried to persuade her. Deborah agreed, but once again rejected the option suggested by the doctors. In this story, Michael seemed more and more like an outsider. He merely observed as Deborah scrutinized portfolios and attended meetings. But the final decision was always hers. At some point, Michael decided that it was just a whim for Deborah to find an incubator. Nevertheless, he still loved his wife. And even if they never had children, he would survive it. One day, Michael found Jennifer in tears. She tried to do something around the house, but tears were streaming down her face. The young master asked her what had happened. At first, Jennifer shook her head, biting her lip, but then she burst into tears and told him everything. It turned out she had a son, a 5-year-old boy who lived with his grandmother in the same city. Jennifer only visited them on weekends. Their long-awaited reunions were always filled with joy. However, lately, Jennifer noticed that Carl became somewhat listless, so she insisted her mother take the grandson to the hospital. She would have gone with him, but how could she leave her job? The mother kept postponing it until one day they had to rush Carl to the hospital by ambulance. It turned out he had leukemia. He was currently in the hospital. The doctors promised to help, but at the same time, they said that the most effective assistance would be costly. But where could she find such a large sum of money? Do you know what I thought? Jennifer said, wiping her tears. You're looking for a surrogate mother, right? Maybe I can help you? I'm healthy and strong. I already have a child. Understand, I really need the money. And believe me, I'll fulfill all the terms of the contract. I can't make such decisions without Deborah, Michael shrugged. But I promised to talk to her about it. And just in case, give me your bank account number. Why? Jennifer asked in surprise. So that I have it, Michael replied vaguely. Jennifer didn't ask anything else. She obediently wrote down her bank account number on a piece of paper while Michael looked at this unfortunate girl, and he felt the urge to help her right there, without any conditions. But he had a wife, and she dreamed of having a child, and if Jennifer wants to help, then why not? That same evening, he told Deborah about Jennifer's misfortune and her offer. And you want the mother who gave birth to a sick child to carry our baby? Deborah exclaimed indignantly. Michael, can't you think straight for a moment? What does her child's illness have to do with it? Michael asked in surprise. It will still be our baby. You understand that, right? Yes, I understand, his wife waved her hand dismissively, but it's still not right. We don't know how her body will affect ours. No, definitely not. Well, fine, Michael sighed, but we still need to help Jennifer. What do you mean by a help? Deborah asked, surprised. Listen, her son is sick. He needs a $3 million operation that we can afford. It's not such a huge sum for us, but it can save the boy's life. Tomorrow, I'll transfer the money from our joint account to Jennifer's. You don't mind, do you? I mind, Deborah literally shouted, why do you think you can throw around such money like that? Well, technically, I work, and these are my earnings, Michael reminded calmly. Yours, his wife grew angry, this money is from my father. He just gives it to you. Oh, I see, Michael smirked, and here I thought I was still working, increasing our company's profits. Notice how we've had 5 times more clients in these 2 years. Nonsense. It's still my father's merit primarily. How dare you? Michael was struck by the changes in his wife's behavior. There was no longer that sweet, kind girl, she had become a greedy woman completely unaffected by someone else's sorrow. Deborah, but Jennifer has been serving in our house for many years. For years, Deborah agreed. So she abandoned her child when he was only a year old and ran to work in other people's homes. That's what she got, she added with a hint of satisfaction. She went to earn money to support her son, Michael reminded her. How can you speak like that? I haven't heard anything about her husband, Deborah sneered, and then her face twisted into an expression of anger. I hate it. They go around with anyone and have kids like cats, and then cry for help. Deborah, please, come to your senses. Jennifer is clearly not like that, Michael continued trying to reason with his wife. But it was as if she didn't hear him, she kept talking about the injustice in the world. She said she would be the best mother in the world, but it wasn't working out. She had money, a husband, and she would have loved a child. Michael decided not to discuss the matter further with Deborah and the next day went to the bank to transfer the money to Jennifer's account. He didn't inform David either, after all, he earned the money himself. But Deborah pleasantly surprised him. He never expected his wife to behave like this. Yes, with time, all the masks fell off. In the evening, Michael was at home, and David had gone on a business trip. Deborah was resting in her room. Jennifer greeted him in the hall. Good evening, will you have dinner? She asked with a noticeably brighter voice. Yes, Michael agreed and smiled at Jennifer. I can see your mood has improved. Yes, you won't believe it. I received the money. The full amount, Jennifer replied with enthusiasm. I know, Michael winked. So it was you? Jennifer gasped. Then she frowned, but we never discussed it. I didn't even go to the hospital. And Deborah didn't say a word to me. She's unusually silent today for some reason. Jennifer, calm down. You won't have to be our surrogate mother. Deborah doesn't want it. I decided to help you just like that. But there is one condition, it will be our little secret. Michael put his finger to his lips, not a word to anyone. But why? What for? Why me? Jennifer repeated in confusion. I'm nobody to you. It feels awkward. How are you nobody? You're our helper, Michael smiled. But on a serious note, put aside all your doubts and take care of your son. Maybe you should take a day off? Yes, I wanted to talk to Deborah about that. I will talk to her myself. You get ready right now and go to your son in the hospital. Also, there will probably be a lot of things to take care of tomorrow, so you don't need to come to work. I'll tell Deborah myself that I let you go. Jennifer gratefully smiled and then suddenly rushed to him, hugging him tightly. Oh, forgive me. I don't know what I'm doing. Thank you so much, she said. Jennifer ran to her room, but then returned hesitantly. You still need to set the table, she said. Jennifer, stop, Michael waved his hand, do you think I can't handle that myself? Go on, maybe I should drive you there? No, thank you, Jennifer blushed, I'll manage on my own. 5 minutes later, she was hurrying to the gates. Michael watched her through the window. He caught himself thinking that he was looking at this young woman, almost a girl, with interest. Yes, he liked Jennifer. She was so sweet and calm. But what was this trial for her and her child? What did he even know about her? They barely talked in these 2 years. Where was the father of her child? Michael's thoughts were interrupted by a noise. He turned his head, something had fallen in Deborah's room. His wife was sitting on the bed, and the shards of a vase she treasured lay nearby. Deborah looked perplexed at the broken pieces, and her lips were whispering something soundlessly. What happened, Deborah? Nothing, his wife said listlessly, I smashed it to hell. Fed up with it. Called Jennifer. Let her clean it up. But I let her go. She needed to be with her son at the hospital, Michael explained. What? Deborah exclaimed, you let her go without telling me? I'm her mistress. Darling, calm down. She really needed to be with her son at the hospital. Michael tried to pacify her. With her son? Deborah sneered. Stop it. We'll have our baby too, Michael assured her. No, we won't, Deborah cried with tears. Today, the clinic called me. They did some more tests and found out that I have some rare genetic disease. My child will be non-viable in any case. She fell on the pillow and sobbed, and Michael tried to comfort her. He had forgotten all about his wife's tantrums. He just felt sorry for his dear girl and wanted to somehow ease her pain. He spoke words of consolation, gently stroked her head, and soon she calmed down and fell asleep. Michael cleared the shards of the vase and lay down next to her, looking at his sleeping wife. She was beautiful and so unhappy. And how could he help her? Deborah's last dream was shattered. She wouldn't be able to become a mother. And it turned out he wouldn't have a child either. Michael's heart ached. If just 2 years ago he treated it casually, now he was starting to understand. He wanted to continue the family line. But life is a complicated thing. The next morning, Michael woke up early, covered Deborah with a blanket, and hurried to the bathroom. The smell of some baked goods wafted from the kitchen. Michael smiled contentedly, anticipating breakfast, and then he heard his wife's hysterical scream. He rushed into the room. Deborah was holding the phone in her hands. I received a notification, she yelled when she saw Michael. It came yesterday. I only read it now. You transferred $3 million to some clinic's account. Is it for that girl's son? Deborah, don't shout. The account is joint, and I have full right to manage it, Michael replied, trying to appear calm. Yes, I transferred the money for Jennifer's son's treatment. I believe it's the right thing to do. She has been serving us faithfully for so many years, and we simply owe her help. We? Deborah practically growled, I told you not to touch the money. Deborah, calm down. It's not like it's our last money. I earned them myself. Oh, sure, you earned them yourself, thanks to my dad. Oh, and speaking of him, here he comes. Now you'll have to explain to him. Through the bedroom window, they could see David walking up the path to the house. He returned from his business trip. Michael shifted his gaze from the window and looked attentively at his wife again. He couldn't understand why such a radical change had occurred in Deborah's character. Always calm and sweet, now she acted like a fury. He didn't marry her for this kind of behavior. David came in first and found her in a state of distress. She spoke incoherently about her troubles, the final verdict of the doctors, and then angrily disclosed how Michael had used the money. Dad, he gave money to that servant, she cried, and he didn't even tell me anything. He felt like the master of the house. David looked at Michael with anger. Michael stood there, his head down. He was so tired of having to justify himself. He was supposed to be a full-fledged family member, but his wife was behaving in such a way that he felt like slamming the door and leaving for good. Apparently, David understood this. He didn't want to lose Michael. He was useful and needed both for the business and for his daughter. Let's go, Michael, to my office. We need to talk. And you, Deborah, don't worry. I'll handle everything. How? Deborah continued to be angry, we need to get our money back. Cancel the payment. I will handle it, David said firmly. In the office, David paced back and forth for about 5 minutes, lost in thought. Michael remained silent. He had no intention of justifying himself as he believed he had done the right thing. Do you realize what you put my girl through? David finally spoke, Michael, this is not acceptable. Such decisions should be made with mutual agreement. But there's a sick child involved. I decided to help, Michael calmly replied, and I believe I did the right thing. Right, David smirked, like Robin Hood, huh? Understand, you can't help everyone. Jennifer is almost a part of our family. And I'm surprised she didn't ask you for help earlier. Yes, she mentioned it, David sighed wearily, but I told her I don't have spare money. And that's true, Michael. We are both businessmen. You should understand that if you start throwing money around, it won't end well. David, I earned that money. Yes, I don't dispute that, but understand Deborah too. She's used to being listened to. Right now, she's upset. Upset? Michael chuckled, she's behaving inappropriately. She belittles me and insults Jennifer in every possible way. Speaking of Jennifer, David interrupted him, where is she? I didn't see her when I returned. I told her not to come today. Let her spend time with her son before the operation. I see, David nodded thoughtfully. Externally, he remained perfectly composed, but inside a storm was brewing. Who was he to make decisions in his house? But he had to hold back for the sake of Deborah, or else she might just leave for good. Let's do this then, he said, Jennifer doesn't have to return the money. Fine, we'll do a good deed, but I'm firing her. What? Michael exclaimed, why? She hasn't done anything wrong. I'm firing her because I see that my Deborah gets too nervous even at the mention of her name. Maybe it's because of yesterday's conversation with the doctors. Yes, everyone else has kids except her. But it's not right. She needs to take some sedatives. This is unacceptable. I'm shocked by her recent behavior. She wasn't like this before. Now she'll hate all mothers with children, Michael spoke anxiously, and Jennifer, how can you do this to her? She needs to treat and raise her son, and you're taking away her job. I'll give her a good recommendation, but she won't set foot in my house again, David said firmly, and that's it. She should be thankful I didn't reverse yesterday's transaction. That's the end of the discussion. Now get ready for work. Michael stepped out of the office. He felt like a schoolboy who had just been scolded by the principal for something he didn't deserve. He sat at the breakfast table, contemplating the situation that had unfolded. Father and daughter had shown their true colors. And all this time, he had thought he was lucky, a loving wife and a reasonable father-in-law. But it turned out that nothing was more important to them than money. Did my daughter and father give you a piece of their minds? The cook whispered to him while clearing the table. I heard everything. I feel sorry for Jennifer. And you better not push too hard, or it will cost you. I just don't recognize my wife anymore, Michael said. But I do, the cook narrowed her eyes, she's always been selfish, self-absorbed, thinking the world should revolve around her. That's how David raised her. When you came into the family, she changed. I thought your love had fixed her. But no, character always shows itself sooner or later. I hope she won't start drinking alcohol again. Drinking alcohol? Michael froze. He certainly didn't know that. She did, the cook said, when her first boyfriend died. Even a doctor had to work with her. Then it quieted down when she met you. What else is coming? Taking the dirty dishes, the cook headed to the kitchen. Michael sat there, trying to process what she had told him. Secrets were being revealed after just 2 years of marriage. Maybe there were still things he didn't know. Deciding to distract himself from the domestic scandal, Michael thought that work would calm him down. On his way, he called Jennifer. From her distressed voice, Michael understood that David had already called her. I'm really sorry. I couldn't convince him, he apologized. Yes, I really need the job right now. Carl will need a long rehabilitation after the surgery, Jennifer replied, her voice almost on the verge of tears. Where else can I find such earning? But it's all right. The main thing is that the surgery is tomorrow. Thank you, Michael. You must be facing troubles because of me too. It's all right, the man sadly smiled. Jennifer, I want to ask you, if you need help, money, or a ride somewhere, call me, don't hesitate. Thank you, Jennifer whispered emotionally, but I don't understand why you're doing this. You have problems because of me. My problems are trivial compared to yours. And I help you because I see that you're alone in this life. Am I right? Yes. Jennifer, everything will be all right now. Thank you again, and with that, they said their goodbyes. A week had passed. Jennifer's son underwent surgery, and the doctors gave positive forecasts. However, money was still needed for further treatment, as the rehabilitation also required significant funds. Unfortunately, Jennifer couldn't find a job despite David's promises of good recommendations. Deborah intervened, and Jennifer was turned down from every household she applied to. The young woman eventually took a cashier job at a supermarket just to earn some money for her son's treatment. In addition to that, she had a sick elderly mother to take care of. Jennifer remembered the conversation with Michael, but she couldn't bring herself to call him. One day, she mustered the courage to dial another number, Carl's father's number. However, a woman answered the call and told Jennifer to forget the number, as Harry was married with his own family now. Those words hurt the young mother deeply once again, as Harry was the one who had shattered her life. 7 years ago, Jennifer was studying at a pedagogical university and dreamt of a life connected to education. Then, at a student party, she met Harry. He was tall, handsome, and very charming. He escorted her home, telling her about his family. His father was an economics professor, his mother a designer. Harry himself was a promising lawyer. His parents owned a country house and an apartment. They even bought him a nice flat in the city center. Jennifer was a bit overwhelmed. She had spent her whole life living with her mother in a one-room apartment. Her mother worked as a dispatcher for an ambulance service, and her father had died in an accident at a factory. It was a normal, simple family. How could she compare with Harry's background? But Harry pursued her, and she surrendered. It was a whirlwind romance. Jennifer was on cloud 9 with happiness. When she realized she was pregnant, she immediately told her beloved. However, he just smirked, reached into his wallet, and took out several large bills. "Enough," he asked with a smirk. "For what?" Jennifer recoiled from him. "For an abortion," Harry said. "Do you really think I'll marry you?" "Harry, what abortion?" "I love you," Jennifer said tearfully. "I told you, you're a fool. Take the money, and we're even." Jennifer refused to take the money. Harry left, saying nothing more, putting the money back in his wallet, and he never called or visited again. Jennifer was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. What should she do? Her mother understood everything without a word. "How many weeks?" her mother asked. 10, Jennifer confessed. "You're going to give birth, dear," her mother calmly replied and hugged her daughter. Jennifer burst into tears. Her mother, her dear mother, was the only one who had always supported and stood by her. She had to leave the institute. No, Jennifer hoped that someday she would be able to recover and continue her studies. For now, all her thoughts were on her little one. Carl was born healthy and strong. At first, there were no signs of trouble, and then came the diagnosis. It was frightening to imagine what would have happened if not for Michael's support. And now, she had no one else to turn to, only him. Michael was even happy to receive her call, inquiring about Carl's condition. Jennifer told him everything, and then finally mustered the courage to ask for help again. "I know it's audacious of me, but I don't know what to do," Jennifer sobbed into the phone, explaining her situation in a flurry of words. Money was catastrophically scarce. "Jennifer, calm down," Michael stopped her. "It's right that you called. I promised to help, and I will." They met the same day in the park. They sat on a bench for a while and talked. Michael handed her money, enough for a month's expenses. "Buy everything your son and mother need," he said before leaving. "Next month, I'll help you again." "No need," Jennifer blushed. "I hope to find a good job." "When you find one, then it's good, but for now, I feel responsible for you," Michael replied. They bid farewell. A month later, Michael came by himself, called beforehand, and arrived at Jennifer's with money, a bouquet, and a cake. They sat in the kitchen for a long time, drinking tea and talking. Jennifer shared her love story, and Michael shared his. "I don't understand," Jennifer looked into his gray eyes. "Did you marry Deborah out of pity?" "Sorry for being blunt." No, I genuinely thought I loved her, and she loved me, Michael sighed, and I didn't care that she was bound to a wheelchair. We were happy together. Then, everything just vanished, disappeared like mist. Now it's all a mess. Deborah started drinking. I find an empty bottle under the bed every day, we argue. But what's the use? What does David say about it? He seems to scold her too, and then feels sorry for her. I don't know how it'll all end. Honestly, I've thought of giving up and leaving already. But I can't. It'd be ugly to leave a wife in a wheelchair. It's not an easy situation, Jennifer sincerely sympathized with Michael. While sitting in this modest, little kitchen, he was probably pouring his heart out for the first time in his life. Then Jennifer saw him off. They stood outside the entrance for a long time. Jennifer's sick mother was watching them from the window. "Dear, be careful with this, Michael," her mother warned when Jennifer came back. "Mom, what are you talking about?" Jennifer was genuinely surprised. "You know what I mean. He's married, and to a wealthy woman at that. No matter what he says now, he won't leave his wife and will just mess with your head. Haven't you suffered enough already?" "I didn't even think about anything like that," Jennifer blushed. She was cunning. Now there wasn't a minute when she didn't think about Michael. But she was afraid to admit to herself that it was true love. And Michael realized he was in trouble. Jennifer was on his mind all the time, at work and even next to Deborah. Things were particularly difficult with his wife. The young woman was slowly but surely drowning herself in alcohol. One day, Michael's aunt from the village came to visit. Ella had been silent for a long time, probably upset that Michael hadn't invited her to the wedding. But time passed, and she decided to visit her nephew. Michael understood that she didn't come without a reason. He received Ella cordially. Surprisingly, Deborah was sober that day. At first, she grimaced when she saw the rustic aunt, but they ended up chatting a little. Before dinner, Ella talked about the peculiarities of village life, and Deborah was astonished, saying, "How do people live like that? Without central heating and with poor internet." "Well, one gets used to everything," Ella sighed. "My house is not great. I want to renovate it, but I don't have the money." She looked questioningly at Michael, but he pretended not to catch the hint. Ella didn't give up. "Michael, I wanted to ask you. Let's sell the plot of land where your parents' house stands. It's registered in your name, and you don't really need it. It would be useful to me. I've already found a buyer. A large family moved in nearby and wants to expand. So, will you give me a power of attorney to sell the plot and the house?" "Well, to be honest, the house is not much of a home now. So, that's why Aunt Ella came to see me," Michael said ironically. "No, Aunt Ella, I won't arrange a power of attorney for you. My house will stay put." "So, you do have a little cottage in the village?" Deborah sneered. Michael didn't reply to her and kept his eyes on his aunt. Ella had aged, but her ways hadn't changed a bit. She was as greedy as ever. She lied about the repairs to her house, which Michael knew perfectly well because, although he didn't communicate with his aunt, he kept tabs on his hometown. He had seen recent photos of Ella's house on the internet, a new roof, covered in siding, just like any other house. On the other hand, Michael's parental home was in shabby condition, the estate in disrepair. It hurt his heart to see it. But he wouldn't give it away to his aunt. Michael just shrugged, not wanting to continue the conversation. Ella got ready to leave, not waiting for dinner. Her nephew didn't try to keep her. In the doorway, Ella bumped into David. He looked surprised at the guest and then suddenly offered to personally drive her to the train station. "Oh, thank you," Ella exclaimed happily. "There are respectable people in this house, unlike my nephew." "Goodbye, Deborah." The aunt deliberately didn't look Michael's way, but he didn't care either. He sensed insincerity from his aunt and had no desire to continue the conversation. When David returned, he casually remarked that Ella seemed like a normal woman. Why had Michael never introduced them? "I didn't consider it important," Michael simply replied. Lately, it was becoming increasingly difficult for him to communicate with Deborah and her father, and now his aunt showed up. Michael's nerves were on edge. And then, a few days later, something happened that further distanced Michael from his wife. That evening, Deborah, as usual, got drunk and peacefully fell asleep in her chair. David, trying to ignore his daughter's behavior, went to his study. He was tired of struggling with Deborah's destructive habit. After all, she had a husband, so let him deal with it. Meanwhile, Michael was sitting in the living room. A hurricane was raging in the man's soul. What had happened to his wife? Actually, he was just fed up with it all. He absent-mindedly played with his phone and suddenly, unexpectedly, dialed Jennifer's number. Hello, he heard her tired voice, so warm and familiar. Michael and Jennifer had already transitioned to a stage of friendly relations. Hello, Michael said joyfully, where are you? At work, where else? But it's so late. Our market is open until 11. I'll come to pick you up, said Michael and immediately left the house. He breathed in the fresh air. It was May. Everything in nature was in bloom and smelled so sweet. And he longed for love. Michael, a young man, also wanted something like that. He was tired of his wife's constant nagging, her antics, her tantrums. Yes, he just wanted some female attention. And thoughts of Jennifer stirred his blood. He waited for her at the market. Jennifer got into his car. Thank you, that was unexpected, she smiled, and I have good news. Carl will be discharged from the hospital in a week. That's great, Michael smiled, I'll definitely pick you up from the hospital, just let me know where and when. Thank you, she replied. Jennifer, how long are we going to behave like children? He unexpectedly asked. I constantly think about you, and I'm sure you do the same. I'm certain. Michael, this can't go on, she whispered, you're married, after all. It's only on paper, you know that. Jennifer, don't torment me. Tell me, do you feel something for me? She paused, and then whispered, I love you. Michael pulled the girl close and kissed her. For the first time in his life, his heart was pounding like crazy. It felt like it would jump out of joy. He kissed his beloved, his true love. He started the car. Where are we going? She asked. To a hotel, Michael replied firmly. And Jennifer didn't object. It was a real night of love, unforgettable. For the first time in his life, Michael was truly happy. And Jennifer too. They believed they had found each other amidst life's trials. They started seeing each other almost every day. Soon, Michael picked up Carl from the hospital. Then they sat at home, at that very kitchen table, celebrating and chatting. Carl turned out to be such a wonderful boy. He quickly bonded with Michael, telling him about the hospital, his favorite toys, and cartoons. Michael listened to the child's babble, smiled, occasionally nodded in response, and added a comment here and there. Jennifer looked at the two most important men in her life, her heart brimming with delight. Everything would be fine now. Michael would divorce his wealthy wife, and they would be together. Jennifer's mother liked Michael too, but something was troubling her maternal heart. A month passed, and Michael still couldn't bring himself to tell his wife that he had decided to divorce her. He was torn by mixed feelings. Yes, he loved Jennifer. But how could he leave his disabled wife? That wouldn't be humane. And David, he was a stern man. If Michael did it, he was sure David would immediately kick him out of the company, depriving him of means to survive. No, Michael was certain he could find a job, but his influential father-in-law would undoubtedly extend his powerful hand even there. The road to all respectable firms would be closed. Michael was tormented and torn by his doubts. What should he do? But he couldn't deceive Jennifer either. He had true, strong feelings for her. And then Jennifer told him that she was pregnant. Michael was overjoyed. He would be a father. He couldn't wait any longer. That very evening, he decided to talk to his wife and David. He would tell them everything and leave for Jennifer with just one suitcase. He had a little money saved up. They would rent an apartment. Michael would definitely find a job. Yes, that's how he decided it. He was walking home, full of determination to put an end to everything. In the living room, he was greeted by David, who seemed preoccupied. "Oh, Michael." "Hello," the father-in-law exclaimed, "I've been waiting for you. We need to talk." "Yes, I also wanted to talk," Michael replied. "Really? About what?" "You go first," Michael hesitated. His resolve was fading with each passing minute. "Well, all right," David agreed, "it's about this. I'm going abroad for 6 months. Remember, we found clients there? And now things are finally moving forward. I want to oversee it personally. I'm just worried if you'll manage here without me." "For 6 months?" Michael frowned. "Yes. You won't be alone, the whole team will be in the office with you. You'll manage, I'm sure." "Okay," Michael nodded uncertainly. "And if you're worried about Deborah, I've sort of resolved that matter too. I found the best doctor for her." "Let's hope so," Michael mumbled. He understood that he couldn't just leave the house now. He couldn't disappoint David, who hadn't really done anything wrong to him. Who would he leave the company to? Besides, it would anger him, especially now. Yes, he needed to wait. "So, what did you want to say?" David reminded him. "Oh, I wanted to talk about Deborah." "We need to do something," Michael replied. "Consider it done," David sighed and patted his son-in-law encouragingly on the shoulder. "Don't worry. Everything will work out with you and Deborah. Maybe you'll even have a child together. Well, if not, you can always adopt. I'm not against it." Michael nodded thoughtfully in response. At that moment, he felt ashamed of his lack of courage, he couldn't confess, hesitated, and pitted Deborah and David. But would they feel the same way once they found out? Unlikely. Michael decided that, for now, he should leave everything as it is. He would live 2 lives with 2 families. It was ugly, deceitful, but for the moment, it seemed like the best option. The next day, he told Jennifer everything as it was. Of course, she was upset. Carl was born out of wedlock, and the situation was unclear, but she would keep the child regardless. Jennifer believed in Michael and was willing to wait as long as needed. As promised, David brought a good specialist for Deborah to the house, and a week later, seeing that his daughter was finally recovering, he left on a lengthy business trip. Before that, he granted Michael a general power of attorney to manage the company. Anxious days, weeks, and months followed for Michael. He worked from morning till night, then rushed to Jennifer. His beloved never reproached him for anything, instead, she arranged their little family nest, the rented apartment. Carl got used to Michael and sometimes shyly called him Daddy. The man smiled contentedly. Yes, this boy was very dear to him. And the daughter, who was due to be born in some time. He often spent the night at Jennifer's place. Deborah said he was simply working a lot and occasionally stayed at the office. Engaged with her doctor, she initially believed everything, but then she began to look suspiciously at her husband. "If you're cheating on me, Dad will kill you," she once told Michael in the morning when he was getting ready for work. "Why would you think that?" Michael was a bit flustered. "It's just my assumption," she shrugged, "but remember, I'm not going to share you with anyone. You're mine." "So, I'm your property?" Michael replied with a smile. "Don't smile. You owe me everything, your job, your car, even this suit and tie." Michael nervously twitched his shoulder. How tired he was of these reproaches. After all, the company was now thriving thanks to his efforts. But in her eyes, he still owed everything to her father and her as well. In that moment, he wanted to tell her everything, pack his suitcase, and leave for Jennifer. But he held back. "Michael, you've changed a lot," Deborah continued, "you've become so cold, distant. We haven't been intimate for I don't know how long." "Don't you understand why?" he asked grimly. "You're always drunk." "If you haven't noticed, I haven't been drinking for 2 months," Deborah replied. This doctor really works wonders. Well, that's good to hear. Good, Deborah unexpectedly softened her tone. Michael, come home early from work today. Let's have a romantic evening. Let's stop living like strangers. We're a family. A family, Michael nodded. Unfortunately, it won't be possible today. I have a lot of work on site. Well, then let's reschedule for a more convenient day, Deborah replied peacefully. Kiss me, goodbye, like in the good old days. Michael kissed his wife. How could he deceive Jennifer like this? But he was waiting for his father-in-law's return. As it turned out later, that was his mistake. David called soon after and told Michael that he would have to stay for a couple more months. How are you holding up there? Managing everything, he asked his son-in-law. I'll manage, Michael replied gloomily. He was completely lost. What should he do? Jennifer was due to give birth in 2 months, and he hadn't made any decisions yet. He felt ashamed of his indecisiveness in front of the woman he loved, but she didn't reproach him and was willing to wait. During this time, Deborah had changed, she looked fresher and had forgotten her harmful habit. The only thing that worried her was her husband's coldness. And one day, she decided to follow him. She couldn't do it herself, so she hired a detective. Soon, the detective brought back photographs. There was Michael strolling with Jennifer in the park, they looked so happy together. Jennifer had her hand on her belly, smiling. There they were, kissing. And there they were sitting in a cafe with Jennifer's boy, apparently her son. That scoundrel, Deborah whispered when she saw the proof of her husband's infidelity. She wants to take my husband away from me. No, it won't work. She didn't show any sign of knowing Michael's secret and decided to wait for her father's return. Let him decide what to do. Time passed, and David finally returned. Michael was polite and reported on his work. David was happy to see his daughter. There was no hint that she drank alcohol. She was lovely and beautiful as ever, though her eyes held some worry. After dinner, Michael excused himself for urgent matters at the office and left, leaving his daughter alone with her father. Do you really believe he went to the office? Deborah asked, suddenly sounding angry. I don't know. Are you doubting it? David squinted in surprise. Daughter, has something happened between you two during this time? Nothing good. He's cheating on me. And you know with whom? With our former maid. With Jennifer. Deborah, maybe you're mistaken? David frowned and clenched his fists. I'm not mistaken. I have the evidence. Deborah went to her room and brought back the photos, placing them on the table in front of her father. That monster is pregnant, she cried with tears in her eyes. David didn't say a word, he looked attentively at the photos, and his expression grew darker with each passing minute. What a scoundrel, he finally uttered. Did you say anything to him? Nothing. I decided to wait for you. Dad, I'm afraid he'll leave me. And I don't want that. Do something. Don't worry, my daughter. Pretend you don't know anything. I will handle this girl myself. Are you going to hurt her? Deborah asked with hope in her voice. You're so cruel, David smirked. No, there are other ways. I want her to suffer. Dad, what are you planning? Deborah asked with curiosity. I'm not entirely sure yet. But I'm asking you to pretend that you don't know anything. Otherwise, he might freak out and actually leave. And we don't want that. You need a husband. So let's think it through. I'll make a call right now. Meanwhile, Michael was with Jennifer. He happily told her that he would talk to her father-in-law tomorrow, and they would finally be together. Michael even suggested that they might have time to get married before the birth. That's unlikely, Jennifer suddenly gasped. Her water broke. Michael drove her to the hospital. On the way, they dropped off Carl at his grandmother's place. You'll meet your little sister soon, Michael winked at the boy. Can't wait. I've missed her so much, Carl replied. I'll be the best brother in the world. Michael and Jennifer both managed to smile, but in the next moment, a new contraction hit Jennifer, and there was no room for smiles. Michael hurried to the wheel. They arrived at the hospital quickly and without incidents. Jennifer was admitted to the maternity ward. Hang in there, my love. Michael called out to her. I love you. I love you too, Jennifer whispered. Michael was determined to stay in the waiting area. He would wait until he received the joyful news. However, the duty nurse discouraged him. There won't be any news until early morning. Go home, she advised. No, I'll stay here, Michael shook his head. He was deeply concerned about his beloved. How is she doing in there? I'm telling you, go home, the nurse insisted, get some rest. Tomorrow morning, you'll find out everything. You'll need your strength too. But what if something goes wrong? He asked anxiously. What could possibly go wrong? Your wife is young and healthy. Besides, the head of the department is on duty tonight. Trust me, your Jennifer is in good hands. Are you sure? Michael asked with hope. Everything will be fine, the woman smiled at him. Michael listened to her and went to the rented apartment where Jennifer and Carl lived. Now he was determined, starting from tomorrow, his life would change drastically. No more lies. In the morning, he would talk to David, and then to Deborah. He would file for divorce. He woke up at 7:30, checked his phone with anxiety, no missed calls. For some reason, his heart pounded with worry. Michael called the hospital. I want to know about Jennifer. How is she? He asked the girl who answered the phone, feeling a bit nervous. Everything is excellent. Jennifer gave birth to a baby girl. A girl. Is everything okay with both of them? He inquired further. Both your girls are doing well, the nurse chuckled. You can visit today from 3:30 to 6 p.m. Bring a gift. What can I bring them? I don't know, he admitted. Not much is needed. You can get some green apples and non-carbonated mineral water. We feed them well here. Don't bring flowers, they're not allowed in the ward. Thank you, Michael muttered. He hung up the phone and sat there for another 5 minutes, unable to believe that he was now a father. Afterward, Michael started getting ready for work. A difficult conversation with David was ahead. The father-in-law was already in the office, waiting for his son-in-law. In David's mind, a cunning plan had matured. If Michael knew about it, he would never set foot in the office again. However, he wanted to resolve everything peacefully. Come in, David smiled as he saw Michael at the door. Where have you been? Deborah said you didn't spend the night at home, he smiled, but his eyes were icy. Michael gathered his courage and told David about his second family. David, I feel so guilty towards Deborah, and I don't know how to confess to her. But understand, you can't command your heart, Michael said, his gaze lowered to the floor. Well, you're right. You can't command your heart. If you've decided to leave for this Jennifer, then go. Just I ask you, don't tell Deborah that she's given birth. You understand how painful it would be for my daughter to know that someone else has your child. Say that you fell in love with someone else. That's all. And one more thing, you're planning to leave your job. That's unnecessary. You're a good employee. Personal matters are personal, but business comes first. I won't fire you. You'll remain my deputy, David said. Michael looked at his father-in-law in surprise. How was this possible? He had expected the worst, but it turned out differently. David was handling it so nobly that it was hard to believe. After all, Michael had hurt his daughter. Or did David have something planned? But it seemed not. He looked sincere, regretful, but without hatred. Yes, Michael had underestimated his relative. Thank you, David, and forgive me, Michael mumbled. May I go see Deborah? Yes, of course, David replied. David even smiled, and as Michael left the office, he made a call while watching him through the window as he got into his car. "Have you found out where that wretch lives?" he asked in a low voice into the phone, "and which hospital?" "Well, I see." "When?" "She gave birth today?" "Find out when they'll discharge her, and proceed according to the plan. Be careful and don't dare mention my name anywhere." After that, he put the phone aside and smiled maliciously, as if baring his teeth. "Don't worry, Michael, soon you'll crawl back to my Deborah," he whispered after the departing car, which Michael was driving. Deborah was waiting for her husband. Her father had warned her that he would be coming soon and advised her to let Michael go. "Daddy, you promised," she petulantly exclaimed, "he's mine, and you know that." "Do exactly as I tell you," David patiently explained, "don't throw a tantrum, you can wipe away your tears. Be more confident, my daughter. I promise you, he'll come back to you, it won't even take a month." "Are you really promising?" she asked. "I'll make sure my little girl is smiling," he promised. Deborah promised to do as her father had advised, and she kept her word. The explanation with Michael was brief. Yes, she shed a few tears and let him go. She even wished him happiness. Encouraged by this outcome, Michael went shopping for baby supplies, a stroller, a crib, and all sorts of baby items. By the second half of the day, he was already at the maternity hospital with gifts and a bouquet of flowers. "You can't bring flowers," the nurse in the delivery room said gruffly. "These are for you," Michael smiled at her. The elderly woman smiled back in response. Soon, Jennifer briefly came out to them. She looked so small, thin, and exhausted. Michael's heart squeezed seeing his beloved like that. "Did you suffer a lot?" he asked, kissing her, "My girl, my beloved." "It was okay," Jennifer waved it off. "I had to deal more with Carl, and Victoria was born quickly." "Victoria?" Michael was surprised. "Yes, I want our daughter to be named Victoria. You don't mind, do you?" "No, of course not. It's your right to decide what our little girl will be called. And Victoria is a great name." Soon, Jennifer went back into the ward, and Michael left the maternity hospital. Yes, a new chapter in his life was beginning, and now it held no trace of insincerity. Only love and happiness were to accompany him through life. 5 days later, Jennifer and Victoria were discharged from the maternity hospital. They were all so happy. Then, regular everyday life began. Jennifer stayed at home with the baby, taking care of Carl. Michael continued to work in David's office. His almost ex-father-in-law treated him calmly, only as a coworker. He even took the news of Michael filing for divorce with Deborah calmly, raising an eyebrow at most. But after 2 weeks since Jennifer's discharge, he suddenly called Michael into his office and informed him that he urgently needed to go on a business trip. For 3 days. To Serbia. Michael was a bit disappointed, he didn't want to leave his family even for a day, let alone 3 days. But he didn't argue with David and agreed. At home, he told Jennifer about it. "Will you manage alone?" he asked, packing his things for the trip. "My dear, why are you so worried?" Jennifer reassured him, "Of course, I'll manage. I'm an experienced mom. Besides, I have a helper. Carl can rock the cradle and sing a lullaby. And my mom lives nearby. We'll handle it." These words somewhat reassured Michael. He left with a light heart. On the first day, they called each other several times. Jennifer said everything was fine. But then, suddenly, she stopped answering the calls. Michael was restless. He managed to finish his work somehow. At the airport, he almost ran to catch his flight. After landing, he immediately headed home, even though David had asked him to urgently deliver some documents from partners. The apartment was empty. Some baby items were still there, but it was evident that most of them were taken. The crib and Victoria's stroller were still there, but not a single one of Carl's toys. Michael's heart chilled with foreboding. He went to Jennifer's mother, but it took a long time for her to answer the door. She looked pale, tearful, and aged, even in those 3 days. Vanessa, what happened? Michael asked anxiously, is Jennifer with the kids at your place? He tried to pass, but Vanessa blocked his way. Vanessa, what's going on? Michael asked, staring at her in confusion. Michael, you need to leave, Vanessa said with pain in her voice, you can't be here. What do you mean I can't? Where's Jennifer? Where are Victoria and Carl? Michael exclaimed. And then Vanessa burst into tears, letting him into the apartment. Jennifer and the kids were not there. Vanessa, leaning against the wall, explained what happened. 2 days ago, Jennifer went to pick up Carl from daycare. She was pushing Victoria in the stroller. And then a gypsy woman approached her, asking something like, how to get to the monument? Jennifer wanted to pass, but the gypsy woman blocked her path and started saying something. The young woman, not understanding why, started listening to her, looking into her eyes. It was as if her mind became clouded. When she came to her senses, she was sitting in the park. Her wallet was gone. The stroller was empty nearby. Jennifer immediately rushed to the police station. They started searching and within an hour found Victoria's sweater on the river bank. The police immediately assumed that someone had thrown the baby into the river. Suspicion fell on Jennifer. And it was only through surveillance cameras that they discovered that an old gypsy woman did indeed take the baby out of the stroller and walked away with her. Jennifer stood there, in a daze, then went to the park and sat on a bench. That's where she came to her senses. What kind of gypsy woman was she, and why did she take Victoria? No one could answer. Jennifer didn't believe that someone would throw the baby into the river. For what reason? But the divers found her pants in the river. As they explained, the body could have been pulled under the dam, which wasn't far away, and it's unlikely the body can be found now. Why didn't Jennifer tell me about this immediately? Michael asked Vanessa in anguish. When could she? First, there was all the commotion, then she was held at the police station for nearly a day, and then Vanessa trailed off. And then what? Michael exclaimed in horror. And then Carl's father showed up at the police station. He's a lawyer. He insisted on reviewing the surveillance footage. And then he demanded that Jennifer give him custody of Carl. I don't know why he wants him. He has his own family. But Jennifer didn't come up with anything better than to take her grandson and leave, Vanessa explained. Where did she go? I'm sorry, Michael. I won't say. I'm afraid that if I tell you, Harry will find out and come after Jennifer. She even forbade me from telling you anything. You have to understand, she lost her daughter, and they could take her son away as well. Harry can do that. He's a lawyer. That's nonsense, Michael shook his head, I don't believe that life can turn upside down like this in 3 days. And Victoria. I don't believe she's dead. We have to search for her. The police are searching. But the thing is, they found some gypsies who talked about a crazy old woman who supposedly took more than one child. But they don't know where she takes them. They drove her away long ago, Vanessa sobbed, my poor granddaughter must have died, I guess. Michael, go now. If I find out anything, I'll let you know. But forget about Jennifer. Apparently, it's not meant to be for you two to be together. Michael stumbled out of the apartment. He sat by the entrance for a while, catching his breath, and then, gathering his strength, he went to the police station. There, he was told the same story about the deranged old woman. No one really knew who she was. But the police were almost certain that the child had perished. Michael aimlessly wandered the city streets, not knowing what to do. He tried calling Jennifer several times, but the phone remained silent. Michael even flinched when he heard the familiar ringtone. Jennifer, he shouted into the phone without looking at the display. I haven't been addressed like that before. Michael, what's going on with you? Why aren't you at the office? I'm waiting for the documents, Jennifer's voice replied. Oh, yes, the man remembered, I'll bring them right away. The last thing he wanted now was to go to the office and see David. The boss met him in the corridor. "Well, Michael, you really got me nervous." "I urgently need those documents," David exclaimed, taking the folder from Michael. Then he glanced at his face. "Michael, what happened to you?" He immediately ushered his former son-in-law into the office, asked the secretary to make 2 cups of tea, and Michael, regaining his composure, began to tell the story. David listened without interrupting. "A strange story," he sighed. "Michael, I genuinely sympathize with you. Of course, I don't welcome your Jennifer, but no one deserves such a fate. And the poor little girl never even got a chance to live. But don't worry. Miracles can happen, you know." "They can," Michael almost whispered and stood up. "I'm sorry, but I won't be able to work today. And not tomorrow either. Can I take a few days off?" "What are you talking about?" David nodded. "Of course. Take some time to rest and recover. And, Michael, you shouldn't be alone right now. Maybe you could come over to us? Deborah is doing well. Just talk to each other as friends. After all, you used to do that before. And don't think I'm trying to reconcile you with my daughter. No. Whatever happened between you two, there were also many good times." "Yes, there were," Michael sighed, remembering their first conversations, walks in the garden, and talks under the old apple tree. Michael was so devastated that he couldn't comprehend anything anymore. He felt hurt and just wanted to confide in someone. Sensing his mood, David took him by the arm, and they headed towards the car. David informed Deborah on the way, and she greeted them in the hallway. Sitting in her wheelchair, she looked so kind and welcoming. "I baked an apple pie myself," she said with a smile. They had tea with the pie, talked, or rather David and Deborah did most of the talking, while Michael mostly listened. His mind was elsewhere. Then they strolled with Deborah through the garden, sitting once again under the apple tree adorned with ripe fruits like a Christmas tree. "Forgive me for burdening you with all this," Michael said, "but I have no one else. As it turns out, you're my only friend." "Don't apologize." "It's all right," Deborah replied. "But it must be unpleasant for you to hear all this. About another woman, about a child," Michael said. "I admit, it's not easy. But, as you say, you're my friend, and besides, technically, we're still married." "We never really got divorced," Deborah said. She paused, seemingly gathering courage, and then continued, "Michael, if you ever decide to come back, I'll take you back. And I won't reproach you for anything." Michael didn't respond, he just hung his head. He still loved Jennifer. 6 months passed. During that time, Victoria was never found, and Jennifer disappeared. Vanessa also vanished. The neighbors said she sold her apartment and went somewhere else. Michael realized he had lost Jennifer forever. However, Deborah was there for him. She called, inquired about his well-being. David remained friendly, occasionally inviting him to the mansion for dinner. And soon enough, Michael moved back in with his ex-wife. Although, why call her ex-wife? In the midst of all the chaos, Michael completely forgot about it. Yes, Michael became a full-fledged member of the family again. Work, home, Deborah, Jennifer and their daughter were forgotten. Life moved forward. 2 more years passed, and it seemed that everything was calm with Deborah. She began making new plans. Now she wanted to adopt a child from an orphanage. Michael didn't object, although thoughts of another child inevitably brought back painful memories of Victoria. But he tried his best not to show it. And then the unexpected happened. David least of all expected it. On a weekend morning, the security guard informed him that some guy was asking for the owner. David checked the cameras and visibly paled. At the gate stood a short, stocky guy with a rather peculiar appearance, likely recently released from prison. The owner clearly recognized him. David knew that Deborah and Michael were still asleep, so he let the visitor in, cautioning him to speak quietly. They went into the study. Little did they know that Deborah had seen them. She had already woken up and was in the kitchen, contemplatively studying a recipe for some pastries on a culinary website. Yes, lately, Deborah had been the perfect wife. All her mistakes and missteps were in the past. When she saw her father walking with some unknown guy into the study, her curiosity was piqued. What could a businessman have in common with such a dubious character? So she decided to eavesdrop on their conversation. Silently, she wheeled her chair closer to the door and froze. "I need money," the guy was saying. "I gave you everything back then," David calmly replied. "You won't get a single cent more." "Why?" the interlocutor smirked. "Then I'll tell your beloved daughter who ordered her first love to be killed. I'll tell her all the details of how you instructed me to get Brian drunk at the bar, then drive him to the bridge, put him in the driver's seat, and send the car into the river. By the way, you were generous back then. Paid handsomely. And now you'll pay again. Do you want to go back to prison?" David asked. "If that case gets reopened, I'll drag you down with me. Do you doubt it? Oh, your daughter will be devastated. She loved Brian so much back then. He was a scoundrel, and you know it. He was a human being, and you ordered him to be killed. Damn you." The sound of a safe being opened and the rustling of banknotes could be heard. Deborah, realizing what she had just heard, stepped back from the door and hurried to the bathroom. There, sobbing, she began to take sedatives. She thought it should take effect instantly, so she kept swallowing one tablet after another. But the sobbing only intensified, and her heart ached. Brian, her first love. Her father had a hand in his death. And then he comforted her so sincerely, empathized with her. He was the only one she trusted so deeply. How could she live with this truth now? Suddenly, Deborah felt a strong desire to drink something stronger. She made her way to the kitchen. Her father and that guy were already outside, saying their goodbyes. Deborah took out a bottle of cognac from the refrigerator and immediately took a swig from the neck. And then another one. David found Deborah unconscious. He was simply dumbfounded. His daughter had lost control again. What could have happened? Is Michael acting up again? "Why, Deborah," he yelled at his daughter, shaking her by the shoulder. "You monster," Deborah whispered, "it's your fault that Brian died." David blushed, realizing that his daughter had heard everything. He decided that she would sleep it off and forget about it. He took her to her bedroom and put her to bed. Michael had just woken up and didn't understand anything. Could history be repeating itself? No, he wouldn't tolerate it. "Michael, I hope this will end," David said, "and if not, I'll call that specialist tomorrow, the one who helped back then." The men left the room, leaving Deborah alone, unaware that her condition was not only due to the cognac. She had taken too many sedatives. They didn't disturb her until lunchtime, let her sleep it off. But when Michael looked into the room, he turned pale with horror. Deborah was having convulsions. "Deborah, what's happening?" he exclaimed, rushing to his wife. "Don't believe him. He's a terrible person," Deborah whispered before losing consciousness. The ambulance arrived. Later, the house staff found 2 empty blister packs of sedatives in the garbage bin. Everyone understood it then. But it was too late. They couldn't save Deborah. Her heart had stopped. Standing by his wife's grave, Michael felt unbearable guilt. His poor daughter, so unhappy. Despite all the wealth, she couldn't become healthy and happy. And he. Yes, he tried to be her friend and husband, but perhaps those two roles were incompatible. He couldn't love her, and she suffered because of it. She drowned her sorrows in alcohol. But why did she take sedatives too? Everything seemed fine recently. Or maybe he didn't notice something. It was his fault. At the funeral, David was not himself with grief and also blamed Michael for their daughter's death. "Get out of my house," David told Michael right after the funeral. "You don't work for me anymore. I don't want to know you." Michael didn't argue. Yes, he was to blame. And he would leave. But where to go? Then, Michael remembered his hometown. What if he returned to his homeland? Why not? People live everywhere, and he could manage. He had some money. He could start farming there. 10 hours by car, and there he was, entering his native village, where he hadn't been for many years. It was getting dark outside. Michael drove past Ella's house, noting that she had done a good job repairing it. How does she manage to live like that? Anyway, it's not his business. He still didn't want to have anything to do with his aunt. Michael decided to settle in his parents' house. Yes, after so many years, it had deteriorated significantly. The main thing was to have walls, and then he would figure something out. Yes, there were walls. And even a roof. The house had turned gray and sank into the ground, but it was still standing. The windows and doors were boarded up. It was a sad sight. Michael walked around his parents' estate, assessing the scale of the work. Yes, he would have to work hard to bring everything back to a decent condition. There was no electricity in the house. After removing boards from the doors, Michael entered the house and looked around. Some furniture remained, and the stove was intact. But everything was covered in such a thick layer of dust that it was frightening to imagine how much cleaning was needed. By the light of a lantern, Michael managed to tidy up the smallest room, deciding to continue the work the next day. For now, he would eat a snack and rest. There was a bed, still iron, in the house. And he had brought a mattress and bedding with him. Michael went out to the porch, munching on a sandwich and washing it down with cooled tea from a thermos. He sat on the step, inhaling the cool night air. Suddenly, Michael heard a sound. It was either a baby crying or a kitten meowing. He listened carefully and distinctly heard sobbing. It was a baby crying, and the sound was coming from the neighboring dilapidated house. Michael grabbed his flashlight, bravely stepped onto the neighboring estate, and called out, "Who's there?" The crying stopped for a moment and then resumed even louder. The baby was trying to say something, but it was incomprehensible. Apparently, she was still very young. Michael carefully crawled through a hole, illuminating the interior of the house. In the opposite corner near the collapsed stove, he saw the child. It was a 3-year-old girl. The little one was sitting on bricks, and one of her legs got stuck in the rotten floor, and she couldn't pull it out. "Stay calm. I'll help you," Michael said. He tried to figure out how to approach the stove without falling through himself. If such a little one had fallen, he was at risk too. Carefully, he managed to break off a piece of the floor, made the hole bigger, and then slowly pulled the girl towards him. Then he swiftly pulled her close and quickly walked towards the exit. The remains of the stove collapsed with a crash, and the floor cracked, leaving behind a huge black hole where the girl had been sitting just moments ago. Michael felt uneasy, imagining what would have happened if the little girl had still been there. "How did you end up here?" he asked gently, wiping the tears from the girl's eyes. With Michael holding her, she calmed down a bit, though still shuddering from recent suffering. "Where's your mommy?" he asked again. "There," the girl finally said, gesturing somewhere outside. How to find parents at night? And why aren't they looking for their child themselves? These questions troubled Michael. What should he do? Should he go knocking on every door, waking people up? But there might be dogs. Michael decided to wash the girl, feed her with what he had, and put her to sleep. In the morning, he would figure things out. He made her a sandwich and poured some tea. The girl ate with greed and looked at him questioningly. "More," he was surprised. "Okay, one more." "You can't have more, or you'll feel sick." The girl chewed on the sandwich. She babbled something in her child's language. Michael could somewhat understand her. Her mommy and daddy were fighting, and she didn't want to be with them. She hid in the house to escape from her brother, who bullied her. Michael was just shocked. What kind of family was that? By the light of the lantern, he looked closely at the girl's face, and it seemed like he had seen her somewhere before. But how was that possible? Maybe he had just dreamed it. He laid her down on the mattress and settled down on the floor, using some of his belongings as a makeshift pillow. Yes, tomorrow would be a very eventful day. Michael had no idea just how much. Michael woke up, and the little girl was peacefully sleeping. He adjusted the blanket, and then his hand froze. He was staring at the sleeping child's face intently. He definitely knew this girl. But from where? And then the first guess hit him like a bolt of lightning. She was the exact copy of him as a child. The same dark, thick hair, and eyebrows. He remembered himself in the only old photograph that was kept at his aunt's house. The family album had disappeared, but this photo had remained. He was sitting on a bike and looking seriously at the camera. No, it must be just a coincidence. Michael shook his head. And then he fixed the little girl's leg, which had slipped off the bed. But the next moment, his hands trembled. On the girl's leg, he saw a birthmark. He remembered that birthmark, it was shaped like a little star. His newborn daughter Victoria had the same one. He and Jennifer used to laugh that they had a starry girl. Now, of course, the birthmark was larger, but the shape was the same. Michael stood up and, in excitement, went outside. Could he be going crazy? How could his Victoria end up here? And why? Then it hit him like an electric shock again. He would find all the answers from his aunt. Waiting for the girl to wake up, he fed her, and then they went to see Ella. On their way, they met an old lady. "Oh, she spent the night away from home again," the elderly woman exclaimed, waving her hands. "Where did you find her?" "What do you mean, again?" Michael asked. "Does this happen often?" "Very often," the old lady sighed. "This girl is not from a prosperous family. 3 of them have already been taken away. And 3 more are running around. Social services come and threaten, but they haven't taken the remaining children yet. They pity those alcoholics until something terrible happens." "And she almost had something terrible happen," Michael gloomily confirmed and told the old lady where he found the girl. "Oh, what a disaster," the old lady wailed, then stopped and suspiciously stared at Michael. "What's your name?" "I'm Michael. Do you remember Anna and Ernest? I'm their son. I used to live with Aunt Ella." "I remember," the old lady exclaimed. "I'm Granny Ida." "Granny Ida, right. I remember," Michael nodded. "Why didn't you go to Ella? Did you stay at the family estate?" Granny Ida asked. "Yes, that's better. A wise decision. Ella has become quite arrogant. Getting rich changed her completely. She lives behind her stone fence." Granny Ida told Michael that 3 years ago, Ella suddenly came into money. She renovated both the exterior and interior of the house. She told everyone that she had won the money. People didn't quite believe it, but no one knew the truth. "Won the money, you say?" Michael smirked. He became more convinced that only his aunt could explain why this little girl looked so much like him in his childhood. He knocked on the gate, and a dog barked in the yard, but there was no movement. He knocked again. "Who's there?" he heard Ella's grumpy voice. The next second, she was looking at her suddenly appeared nephew. "Michael? What brings you here?" she asked, pale. "Why are you with this girl? Let her go home." "Why do you call my daughter that?" Michael suddenly asked her. "She's a normal child." "Daughter?" Ella whispered, her cheeks flushed, and she retreated into the yard, trying to close the gate. "Stop right there," Michael commanded and skillfully placed his foot forward. Then, with his free hand, he forcefully pushed the gate away from himself. With his other hand, Michael held the girl, who clung trustingly to him. "I don't understand you," Ella said. "What are you saying? This girl is the daughter of alcoholics. Everyone knows that. And that's why she looks so much like me?" Michael smirked, then leaned menacingly over his old aunt and hissed, "Tell the truth, you old fool, or I'll do something you'll regret." "I'm not joking. I hardly did anything. David is involved in this," Ella confessed. "Oh?" Michael was surprised. "Tell me everything." They entered the house, and Ella told him everything. The one and only time she was at David's house, she quickly realized that this man could be useful to her. Or she to him. In any case, she offered her services. David smiled then, but he took note of it. He even drove her to the train station, and on the way, he took her phone number. He didn't call for a long time, but then suddenly a phone call came. He said they would bring her a baby soon. She needed to hide it so that no one would ever find out. He explained that it was Michael's daughter from another woman. To prevent his daughter from being upset, they needed to punish Michael by taking his child away. At first, Ella refused, but David offered her a large sum of money. And one night, an old gypsy woman came to her house and brought the baby. So there I was in the house, looking at this miracle, not knowing what to do. Whom should I give it to? Ella sobbed, and then there was a knock on the window. Diana came rushing to me, as always, drunk. She barged in and started crying. It turned out that she had another fight with her Gregory, but during the fight, she threw an iron at him. Only it didn't hit Gregory, it hit their newborn girl. The little girl died. Diana was in tears, saying that prison was waiting for her. She begged me to come up with something. That's when I took her to the room and showed her your daughter. She was sleeping peacefully. I said, take this girl and bury your own somewhere far away in the woods. So she did. She took your girl and buried her in the forest. No one noticed the switch, they were the same age. Michael sat, holding his daughter, unable to believe that all of this was happening to him in real life. His father-in-law wasn't just a cruel person, he was a real monster. He destroyed Michael's life just so he would go back to Deborah. Did she know all these details? Now, he could never ask. Get ready, Ella said to Michael. Where to? Ella cried, maybe we shouldn't? I've already told you everything. We're going to the police. I'll file a statement against my former father-in-law. He must answer for everything. But I'll get in trouble too, Michael. Have mercy on me, Aunt Ella cried. You won't. At most, you'll get a suspended sentence. And soon, at the police station, they listened to an intriguing story. The local investigator would have never believed that such things could happen in their region. Then, there was a call to the central office, where they started investigating who this David was. Soon, they discovered many interesting things. Initially, he denied everything, but the experienced investigator managed to break him. David confessed to the plan he had come up with to get back at his unfaithful son-in-law. He found a criminal who had connections with the gypsies. That man had already done work for them and explained what to say to the police. He gave the old woman the most crucial task, to take the child. Later, they drove her to the village, leaving the girl's clothes scattered along the riverbank. After that, the gypsy woman seemed to disappear across the country with the child. The situation with the child was resolved, but the girl's mother, whom Michael loved deeply, remained. That's when David found out who the father of her first child was, and he also paid him well to scare Jennifer away from the city. Harry did an excellent job with that. And then the plan to get his son-in-law back began. Everything seemed fine, but tragically, the daughter died. But I never physically harmed anyone, David concluded his story, I just wanted my daughter to be happy. Not harmed physically, the investigator smiled, I have different information. Another case has come to light. We arrested a certain Jason Smith. Do you know him? No, David paled, you do know him. Why lie? Well, he told us about how you ordered the murder of your daughter's friend several years ago. Does that ring a bell? In short, David was guilty of many charges. He was sentenced to a long prison term, and he probably wouldn't be released anytime soon. Ella was also convicted, but she received a suspended sentence. Justice was served, and Michael, eager to establish paternity, took a DNA test. Yes, Victoria was his daughter. Michael settled with the girl on the outskirts of the village, rented a decent house from an elderly lady, and started renovating his own home. He hired a construction team. Victoria gradually calmed down and soon began to forget about the horrors she had experienced. Children's memories are short, and sometimes that's a blessing. A year passed, and Michael continued to live alone. He couldn't bear to look at other women, as thoughts of Jennifer painfully lingered in his heart. Oh, how cruelly they were separated. If only he could find her. However, she wasn't on social media, and the police inquiry yielded no results. Michael was raising his daughter, and they had moved into their renovated home. Just as he had dreamed, Michael started farming. Soon, Victoria would have to go to school. One day, as they were strolling past the School of Arts, a beautiful melody flowed from the building's windows. Unexpectedly, Victoria wriggled her hand free from her father's grasp and ran straight into the school. "Victoria, where are you going?" Michael exclaimed and hurried after her. But the nimble 6-year-old girl was faster. She leaped over a couple of steps and darted inside, hesitating at the entrance. A woman there smiled at her. "What is it, my dear child? Do you want to study here?" she asked. "I want to play like that," Victoria replied, pointing her finger towards where the melody came from. "That's Jennifer playing," the woman smiled. "Would you like to see?" "Oh, very much," the girl nodded happily in response. Michael had already reached the doorway. "Victoria, come on, we need to go home." "But let her watch," the woman nodded at him. She took Victoria's hand and led her into one of the classrooms. The music became even louder. The little girl stood in awe, listening and admiring the beautiful lady playing the grand instrument. "That's a piano," the woman whispered. Michael approached, and suddenly he froze, not from the music playing, but from seeing the person performing it. It was Jennifer. His Jennifer. She turned around, their eyes met, and Jennifer fainted. Michael barely managed to catch her. Jennifer nearly lost consciousness again. Michael kept talking to her, telling his story, and she cried, embracing her daughter, and also shared her own story of running away from Harry. Jennifer had tried to disappear from everyone she knew, even changing her and her son's surname. Now her mother lived with them. She had managed to finish the local pedagogical college and continued studying piano at school, which led to her getting a job at the School of Arts. That's how she lived. And Victoria was alive. All this time they were close, but they met again only after 4 years. "We'll never be apart again," Michael whispered, kissing her hands. "Never," Jennifer repeated. Then they headed home, where Vanessa and the grown-up Carl were waiting for them. Jennifer shared the joyful news with them. "May all your trials be in the past," Vanessa said, hugging her grandchildren and looking at Jennifer and Michael. "You simply must be happy." Soon, Michael and Jennifer got married, and they corrected the birth certificates of their children. Now, they were the only mom and dad Victoria and Carl knew. Michael managed his farm in the village and returned home in the evenings. Victoria attended a regular school and a music school. Carl did too. How could it be otherwise? Their mother infected them all with her talent, which she had forgotten for so many years. Though, no, Michael didn't play. He simply loved listening to music, especially when Jennifer played for him. It was always a melody of love.
An amazing story, isn't it? Thank you for listening till the end. I sincerely hope that you truly enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and rate this video. See you in the comments and in new releases.